All right. So today we're going to be talking about Napoleon. We're going to go through his entire life. We're going to talk about his rise to power. We're going to talk about what he did when he was in power. And then we're going to talk about his downfall. And then as we're going through this, what I want you guys to be thinking about is to what extent did Napoleon protect the ideals of the French Revolution, right? So we see this massive revolution for liberty and equality and fraternity. And how much did Napoleon protect those ideals, since he really styled himself as a protector of the revolution? But in what ways did he kind of move away from them? In what ways did he behave like the monarchy that France had just escaped? Right. So Napoleon's early life. So Napoleon actually wasn't born in France proper. He was from Corsica, which is an island off the coast of France. And it actually had a lot of Italian influence. It had belonged to Italy before. So Napoleon definitely grew up on kind of like this borderland area. He received a military education, but he was really interested in the Enlightenment. So he had those Enlightenment ideals with him from a really early age. And early on, so he actually experienced some success as a military commander when he was quite young. So he became commander of the French army in Italy. And he became known as really effective and charismatic. And so he rose through the ranks pretty quickly. But he also experienced some early defeats too. So he went on to become commander of a mission against the British in Egypt. And it didn't work out so well for Napoleon. It was not a great success. But what it really did is it fueled his desire for power. So he's going to return to France and be like, how can I use my military career as a springboard? All right. And actually, Napoleon's takeover of France happens relatively quickly. So he comes back in 1799, and then he proclaims a new republic. So as we remember, right, France prior to this had been ruled by the Directory, and that was that really weak kind of five-person group that ruled France, right? We remember that they were pretty weak. They were pretty divided. So France was kind of ripe for someone to step in and be like, okay, this isn't working. Let's do it again. So Napoleon comes back. He's like, why don't we do a republic? And everyone's like, sure, republic's great. Sounds good. So what Napoleon does is he replaces the Directory with a consulate. So instead of being ruled by 5 people, France is going to be ruled by 3 people. But they're not all equal. Napoleon names himself first consul, and everyone's like, yeah, sure, sounds great, you're first consul. Then in 1802, so a mere 3 years later, Napoleon's like, hey, you know what? Maybe I should be consul forever. Maybe I should be consul for life. And he just names himself that. Everyone's like, yeah, sure, great. And then 2 years later in 1804, Napoleon crowns himself Emperor Napoleon I. And when I say crowns himself, he puts the crown on his own head. And you're like, well, why is this unique? What's special about this? Well, previously the Pope had crowned kings, even though, like, as we know, right, France had done a lot to sort of make their own Catholic Church a little bit more independent from the Pope. The Catholic Church as an institution was kind of slowly losing political power throughout Europe, but the Pope was still pretty powerful. They still crowned kings, right? Napoleon's like, no, I don't have to bow to the Pope. I'll just crown myself. It's fine. And everyone's like, sure, sounds great. Emperor, wonderful. And you're like, wait a minute. So France fought, so this is 15 years since the start of the revolution, right? France had fought this long, bloody revolution for a republic. And then in just a few short years, they're right back to having a monarchy and an emperor who just straight up crowned himself, right? Well, the question is, well, why did people accept that? Sort of my theory is people were just sick of the chaos, right? And as we'll see, this is kind of a pattern throughout European history. A lot of times when the political situation is really chaotic, people just want stability, and they look towards a strong man to bring them that stability. All right, so here's a really famous painting. This is by Jacques-Louis David, and it is of Napoleon crowning himself emperor, or rather he's crowning Josephine there. And then you can see the Pope just chilling in the background there, watching Napoleon crown himself. All right, so let's talk about what Napoleon does while he's in power. So let's talk about his domestic policies first. So how did he change France? And as we're going through this, again, keep in mind, to what extent is he preserving the gains of the revolution? So to what extent is he protecting liberty, equality, fraternity, etc.? And then in what ways is he rolling those gains back? So let's talk about Napoleon and the church. So as you remember, right, the Jacobins were very opposed to the church. They went through all these efforts to sort of rid France of Catholic influence. Napoleon's going to roll that back a little bit. So in 1801, he arranges what's called a concordat, which is just a fancy word for agreement, with the Pope. So what this does is it reestablishes the Catholic Church in France. So rolling back again, sort of those revolutionary changes. But he doesn't make Catholicism the official religion in France. So kind of a compromise here, right? And the Pope also agrees not to take back the lands lost during the revolution. So those were seized by the state. They still belong to the state, right? So again, we're seeing Napoleon make some reversals, but also continue some gains of the revolution. And you could also, again, point to him crowning himself rather than the Pope crowning him as sort of an example of him sort of seizing influence back from the Pope and from organized religion in France. Now, he also makes some really big legal changes. So he establishes what's called the Napoleonic Code, which is a code of laws. So what this was a uniform code of laws for the whole country that established equality before the law, there's a revolutionary gain, and protects religious toleration. So again, protecting some of those ideals of the revolution. The code also formally abolished feudalism. So again, protecting some of those gains. But on the other hand, sort of like what Napoleon did with the church, he keeps some things, he rolls other things back, right? The Napoleonic Code also restricted some of the gains that were made for women during the revolution. So divorce was made more difficult for women to get, and then women's property rights were curtailed or rolled back. All right. Continuing on that theme, so again, some more of his policies also reflect those ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. So, for example, he reorganized the bureaucracy and created a new quote-unquote aristocracy based on merit, not birth, right? So rolling back some of those hereditary noble privileges, allowing people to rise through the ranks and become powerful in the bureaucracy and the military, through service, right? Not necessarily through birth. So this actually kind of reminds me a little bit of some of the legal reforms even made by Peter the Great, actually. So, and Catherine the Great as well. So Napoleon, honestly, if you want to compare him, he's not necessarily an absolute monarch, but he's definitely got some similarities, I think, with those enlightened monarchs that we talked about last unit. Other things that Napoleon did that sort of align with the ideals of the revolution is he implemented universal taxation. So we don't have, a big chunk of the society not paying taxes anymore. And he balanced the budget, right? And as we know, that was a big flaw with the French monarchs in the 1700s, so Napoleon fixed that problem. But again, in other ways, Napoleon kind of rolled back those revolutionary gains. So he imposed censorship. He made it very difficult for the media to criticize him or critique him at all. He implemented a draft, right? So there was mandatory military service. We'll find out why he did that in just a second. And then he protected property rights and he protected the rights of employers over workers. So you can see here, Napoleon isn't necessarily, you can't really describe him as like a protector of the sans-culotte and the common man. In certain ways, his policies did protect the wealthy. All right. Now, Napoleon is really known, actually, as not just an emperor of France, but a conqueror. So what Napoleon's going to do is he doesn't want to just change France. He wants to take over Europe. And there's really, that's what he wants to do. He is the Hitler before Hitler, though, of course, much less genocidal. Thank goodness. All right. So when Napoleon became first consul, so let's roll back, this is way before he crowns himself, a few years before he crowns himself emperor, right? France was actually still at war with all of those countries that had invaded during the revolution, right? So they're at war with Russia, they're at war with Britain, they're at war with Austria, and Napoleon's like, you know what? Okay, I'm going to fix this. So he signs what's called the Peace of Amiens with that coalition in 1802. But this doesn't last very long. Napoleon is not satisfied. He's like, all right, I've made peace, great, excellent. My aim is a little bit bigger. I want to do some more stuff. So war breaks out again with the same set of states, and Prussia joins in with Russia, Britain, and Austria as well. And what Napoleon does, because again, super effective military commander, he crushes that coalition force, and he forces the Austrians, the Prussians, and the Russians to acquiesce in what's called the Treaty of Tilsit. And what this does, so he gets those countries to back off. This allows Napoleon to develop his empire. So this massive continental empire that he builds has three parts. So first of all, there's France proper, which he does make a little bit bigger. He steals some territory for France. Then he has the conquered territories that surround France. We've got Spain, the Netherlands, Switzerland, most of the German states, which is also called the Confederation of the Rhine, excluding Austria and Prussia. So these two first things here, this is sort of the empire, right? So France and then the surrounding territories that Napoleon is like, nope, I want those, and he conquers them, right? Now, we've also got kind of like this periphery, which is those Tilsit allies from the Treaty of Tilsit, right? Now, these weren't part of the empire, so Austria, Prussia, and Russia were not part of the empire. I want to make that clear, but they were kind of like allies, theoretically, because they had sort of acquiesced to Napoleon with that Treaty of Tilsit. But they don't like Napoleon at all. All right, so there's just an illustration, right? We've got a much bigger France that sort of absorbed Belgium, for example. We've got in sort of light pink here the allies. Russian Empire is not colored in for some reason, but they are also one of those quote-unquote Tilsit allies. And then we've got countries that are sort of in orbit, attached to the empire. So we've got Spain, we've got Italy, we've got the Confederation of the Rhine, which is, again, those German states, except for Prussia and Austria, and then the Grand Duchy of Warsaw, which is what used to be Poland. All right. But Napoleon's empire is actually very short-lived, and there are two big reasons for this. Britain, first of all, and then nationalism. So how do those two things lead to Napoleon's decline? So here's the problem. So Britain, right, they're an island. They aren't conquered by Napoleon. They're kind of off doing their own thing. But they're super powerful. And we haven't talked about it much, but Britain and France have been the two really big military rivals for quite a while now. Remember that Napoleon got a start fighting Britain and campaigning against Britain and Egypt, right? They're not friends. So Britain has an advantage, though, against France. And that's their navy. They're an island. They've got a great navy. France, not so much, right? So what Napoleon tries to do is he tries to blockade Britain. So he tries to sort of prevent them from getting any supplies or anything like that, prevent ships from going in and out, with something called the continental system. So he gets Russia, Austria, and Prussia to basically say, hey, okay, yeah, we're not going to trade with Britain. We're not going to do that. But remember, they're not super happy about being conquered, so they're super lax about this continental system, especially Russia, as we'll find out. But Britain, again, this system didn't work, not only because the Allies weren't super into it, but again, Napoleon failed to account for the fact that Britain was not just trading with Europe. They had colonies. They could trade with the Americas. They had all kinds of resources that they had access to. So they're not really cut off from anything. It's really hard to blockade Britain when they've got an empire, right? So Britain's got that advantage as well. So they're going to become they're going to lead the forces against Napoleon, as we shall see. Second factor that really contributes to Napoleon's decline is nationalism. So we haven't talked about nationalism yet, but it really emerges during the French Revolution, and it's going to become really big in the 1800s. So let's talk about what that is. So first of all, what is nationalism? So this is just the sense that your nation is unique, it's special, and it's worth fighting for. So a really big catalyst for nationalism, so what sparked nationalism, is the presence of a hated foreign invader. So this is kind of what happened during the French Revolution itself, right? So during the French Revolution, we see pretty much all of Europe invade France, and French people start to feel the sense that, like, first of all, they're special because they're having a revolution for liberty, right? And they're special because everybody's trying to destroy it, right? They're like, that's what makes us great. So people really feel this sense that we need to rise up, we need to defend France, it's going to be great, it's going to be wonderful. So we saw that with things like the Levée en Masse, right? The Jacobins raised all these forces against the people invading France. We mentioned that was actually pretty successful. But here's the thing, right? So it starts in France, but when the French go places, they actually spread nationalism, right? So now we've got people in Spain being like, oh, we're being invaded by the French, but we're Spanish, we're great, we're special, we should fight the French, right? We've got people in the German states, people in Russia, all feeling that sense of nationalism. Their country is special, it's worth defending, they better kick out those nasty French people, etc., right? So the reason why nationalism contributes to Napoleon's decline is we've got all these people in all these invaded countries feeling this sense of national pride and feeling like they gotta push out the French. All right. So in 1812, Napoleon's going to make a really big mistake. That's going to it's going to be one of the first nail, we talked about Britain and the continental system being a nail, and then nationalism being a nail in Napoleon's coffin. Here's another big nail. He decides to invade Russia, famously. And the reason why he does this is, again, Russia, as we mentioned, was not super into that blockade of Britain, the continental system. They were super loosey-goosey about it. Napoleon decided he was going to teach them a lesson. But again, kind of famously, this is a meme, right? You don't invade Russia in the winter. wintertime. Napoleon, with all his great military tactical strength, did not realize that. So the reason why this is problematic is not only does it deal a huge blow to Napoleon's troops, I forget how many died, but it was a lot, but it really shows everybody else that Napoleon is not as tough as he seems, right? So everyone's like, hey, if Russia can beat him, maybe we can beat him too, right? So all these revolts start occurring across Napoleon's empire. People were like, hey, we can defeat him. They feel this newfound sense of nationalism. And Napoleon loses, essentially. So he's forced into exile on the island of Elba. And one of sort of the weirdest things I think that's ever happened in history, so he's in exile for a while, but it doesn't actually work. At one point, Napoleon's like, you know what? I don't like this. I want to go back. And he just leaves. He sails off the island. He gathers an army. He marches back into France, and he's like, hey, did you guys miss me? And they're like, you know what? Actually, we did. And they take him back, believe it or not. And this is called the 100 Days. But that doesn't last long either. So coup round 2 does not go well. So Napoleon's new army is defeated by the British with their Prussian allies at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. So if you've heard that word Waterloo, people say, oh, this is so-and-so's Waterloo, that means that's a big loss for them. It was a big loss for Napoleon. He's defeated for good. He's sent into exile a second time, and it sticks. And he dies on the island of St. Helena in 1821. So just to end, here's an illustration. Here's him looking longingly out over the sea and the house where he was sent into exile with the tricolor flag.